It's a Sunday morning. That usually means letters and things from bishops, and honestly, even Saturdays we tend to do that, but not this week when the president of the United States turned the whole world upside down by having Elon Musk use literally 20-year-old super geniuses to audit the federal government and start canceling funding left and right. And they started that actually about a week ago, more than a week ago, with Catholic Charities, by extension of canceling funding to various non-governmental organizations. The center of that issue is the issue of migration, people moving around. And Catholic Church, as you well know at this point, has been more than knee-deep into this. And I've spent painfully the last week and a half showing you the various statements from otherwise good bishops when it comes to morality and church politics. A lot of the better bishops have good things to say. But suddenly on this, if they're Americans, they toe the line. The towing the line is that saying that this is a horrible thing that's happening. And when you look at what's happening, the funding, it becomes obvious that, as some have noted, I've seen this a lot on social media, and I wish I could just show it to you, but you may be aware of the so-called prophecy of Pope Benedict XVI when he was just Father Joseph Ratzinger in the late 60s, before he became a bishop. He prophesied that there would be a time coming in the not terribly distant future when the Catholic Church would radically shrink. It would become a poor church again. And he didn't mean that in the same way as that Francis does. There would be a time when the church would have very little, and that would be right before essentially the glorious restoration of the faith. When you look at the funding from the U.S. government to Catholic Charities and to Catholic relief services and Jesuit refugee services and anything related to this, we're talking 80% of the funding or better is from the U.S. government, and that's staggering. In fact, this has become such a big issue now that when you start looking at the grant trackers online, people are trying to point out that the grant tracker, which tracks all grants from all organizations to other organizations, they'll be like, well, we're seeing conservative organizations here too getting grants. Yeah, but they're not government grants. These are from other organizations. And this is why I haven't pursued the American Magazine angle yet, because I reached out to somebody very knowledgeable about this, and they've been looking and they can't find anything yet. And they're much better at this stuff than I am. So we're still looking to see if America or the National Catholic Reporter have received this kind of funding. But you're seeing this now, and the bishops are viewing this as an existential threat. And this is why Bishop Strickland is taking a relatively moderate approach. He reminds us in a recent, relatively short letter that I'll just give you here in a moment, that yes, Jesus commanded us to help those from far off lands who come here, who come to us, whether they're travelers or whatever. When you really look at the order of love that as the church teaches it, what love your neighbor means, it means essentially loving whoever's in front of you first, and then you can logic out how your duty is to love others from there. And in a given moment, there might be someone from a far off land who is in front of you needing help, and you should probably help them. However, the church also says in the catechism, and in every catechism beforehand, and in the writings of saints, and in papal writings, that any nation has a right to control who enters and who does not. It is within their purview. This is a dicey issue, and it looks like Bishop Strickland is trying to take a moderate line. And it looks like that it might actually be the Catholic line, but this is going to upset some people. So brace yourself for this one, because just your daily or periodic reminder, being a Catholic means that your faith and your politics will often conflict, because being a Catholic means that your secular political leanings are going to be challenged, regardless of what they are. This is why you should be a Catholic first, and you should never, ever, ever have pure political loyalties to any party, to any institution, any politician, no matter how much of a historic change agent they might be. So here is Bishop Strickland with Prayer for Immigrants from his Substack, published yesterday. And I will try to post this a link to this at returntotradition.org. I don't usually do that on a Sunday, but I'll try to have a link to this afterwards so you can read it for yourself. He says, it is right and just that nations protect their borders and their citizens, and it is right and just that unlawful visitors who fled their own country as convicted criminals, and those who have committed violent crimes while in our nation, and those who come to plot against our government be returned to their homeland. However, we must also be aware that there are many who have fled to this country because of desperate situations of various kinds, in some cases to escape unjust persecution, abuse, and extreme poverty. Obeying the law is of great importance, of course, and it would certainly be best if they had entered legally, but we must admit that if faced with those kind of circumstances, for example, to feed our hungry children or to protect them from harm, most of us would do the same. Particularly complicates the issue at hand is that the US now faces is that our government for many years has ignored the law and has virtually rolled out a red carpet for immigrants to enter illicitly, providing free phones, food, clothing, housing, healthcare, and education, more than our own homeless citizens and troubled veterans have received. Moreover, some of these who have entered illegally fill jobs that our own citizens needed to survive. This puts us in an uncomfortable situation of having to decide how to correct a situation that our own government caused without causing undue harm to those who were facilitated in entering illegally by our own government. Although it is a fact that our own underprivileged citizens have not received the assistance and jobs they need, in some cases because we have welcomed large numbers of them, it is important that we not extend a blanket of condemnation against those who came here due to desperate situations and who were illegally welcomed by our government and agencies contracted by our own government. The situation came about because our own government failed to perform some of its fundamental duties. It has not protected its own citizens. It has not used humane methods to separate those who are fleeing persecution and those who wished our country harm. And it has allowed hundreds of thousands of immigrant kids to disappear, many of whom were moved here illicitly to get here and are moved around illicitly once they arrive. It is also a fact that many of these individuals have taken jobs that Americans refuse to take, and therefore not only will they be harmed by deportation, but in many ways we will be too. Being, quote, just to all involved, while guarding always the sanctity and dignity of each human life, is not an easy matter in the situation that our own government has been complicit in creating. It seems that up to this point, our government is concentrating on deporting criminals, many of whom had already been slated for deportation but had been permitted to remain. The present administration is to be commended performing these basic duties of government. However, we must not lose sight of the human element in all this and consider that the actions by our own government, both those of the previous administration and now those of this administration, have and will in the future affect the lives of real human beings. Although we stand in appreciation of this administration for trying to right wrongs that have previously occurred by returning us to law and order, we must also consider that in many cases we're impacting people who have been lied to and told that here in this country they would be welcomed and find refuge. Therefore, we must be careful not to condemn them simply because they believe our own government's lies. At this point, then, we must ask, is it just and humane to send home even those who have entered due to persecution or desperate situations at home, and who have found jobs and are paying taxes and are contributing to our country? This is not an easy fix because although they have entered, quote, illegally, they were welcomed into this country with the blessing of our own government. Is it right then at this point to send them back without even exporting the goods they have worked to obtain? We as a country need to have a discussion about what humane and decent treatment of these fellow human beings looks like when put into action. I therefore would like to ask that we pray this prayer. Again, I'll have this posted at returntotradition.org. You should be following Bishop Strickland's Substack if you're not. That way, if you feel compelled to pray this prayer, you can. He writes the following. Loving, merciful Father, we pray for all the immigrants who are being deported from this country. We pray for the swift deportation of criminals and those who would use fear as a weapon for their conversion and for the safety of the citizens in the countries to which they return. We also pray that our government will treat justly people who came through open borders and who therefore believe they were welcome here. We pray that our government leaders respect the laws of this nation, but also that the innocent not suffer for the wrongdoings of lawless leaders. We pray for wisdom for those who must make decisions about these illicit arrivals who have become a part of the fabric of our country, whom we have to come to love as neighbors and co-workers. May these beloved sons and daughters of God be treated with compassion. Now, you may understand why I say that's going to cause some people to be very, very upset with him. Complicating this issue, by the way, is, well, there is a growing sense that in this country, and this is why I started with Catholic Charities. And there was a video that somebody posted that I wanted to show, but I couldn't get it to stop. Maybe I'll try to pull it up here. It's part of a larger sense of us all just getting ripped off, that our own government is ripping everybody off and has been for some time, that we are essentially, you may have heard that we are essentially just tax cattle, right? That we live on a tax farm, like some more radical types, typically more radical libertarian types will say that, but it's not wrong. And I'm going to show you one here, if I can get it to not play, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, because the context here is actually kind of important for what he was talking about. So let's go here to a thing I posted on my Facebook that I found on X, of course. Where did it go?
Hi, welcome to the Department of Government Efficiency.
Did I mute X? Yeah, of course I unmuted it.
Okay, if you're talking about the military,
let's see if I can get it to start over, because the way the Reels works is annoying. So we go open something, and then we go open this.
Hi, welcome to the Department of Government Efficiency. We were looking over last year's budget, and we found some anomalies that we wanted to address. Okay, if you're talking about the military budget, if you want a safe country, that's how much we... Oh, we didn't even start looking at that yet. Get ready for that. No, we were looking at this list here. We wanted to start with the National Pillow Fluffing Initiative. I mean, don't you want your pillow to be fluffy? Not when you're spending over $1 million of taxpayer money. We're cutting that. Also, the Bureau of Elevator Music Standards. Explain yourself. Forgive me if we're trying to set the vibe, bro. $800,000 a year. The National Velcro Noise Study. What's the problem here? You don't have to spend $1 million a year to know that Velcro noise is annoying. Now, the Program of Ice Cube Uniformity and the American Cloud Watching Fund. Okay, that one's a problem, but I'm kind of OCD and I like it when my ice cubes are all the same size and shape, you know? Yeah, we all do, but that doesn't mean you spend $1 million. Now, the Federal Kazoo Orchestra Grant. It's amazing what they could do with those things, honestly. The Federal Bureau of Traffic Cone Counting. $256,343. You're welcome. Now, that's what I call $800,000 well spent. Hi, welcome to the Department of...
Yeah, so I think you get the idea, right? Our government is run by lunatics. Is what it is. And that's really what it is. And as somebody pointed out here, as somebody pointed out in the chat, most of the people arriving are either kids without an adult with them or with an adult who doesn't have somebody that you can verify as their parent, or is clearly obviously not, sometimes with a address written in a Sharpie on their arm, or they are men, young men of military age. This is why it's a concern. We know that a lot of other countries emptied their prisons and sent their people here, telling them in no uncertain terms that it would be a very terrible idea for them to come back. We have become the dumping ground of other places. And so you do get good people, decent people who get caught up in things, who have even you would consider reasons that you would probably can take the similar action they did to come here. And they get caught up in this. And at this point, again, I've said this many times in the last couple of weeks, in the last few months, it looks like Americans snapped. Something happened, and everybody just snapped. You know, Rasmussen released a poll. If you're watching secular media right now, they're like, oh, Americans hate all these things going on. Rasmussen just released a poll saying they have never seen America heading in the right direction numbers in their polling data as high as it is now. 1 point away from being the highest ever recorded. Americans seem to be okay with this and are being remarkably patient about economic numbers. We'll see how long that lasts for. By the way, I found out, for those of you who are curious about why eggs are so expensive, it's because in the last couple of years, the previous administration culled like 1 million chickens, and they just did it like a month before the election or something. And so the chickens that will replace the ones they culled will reach maturity in April. So that's about the time right around April is about the time you're going to see the prices of eggs should start coming back down, unless they didn't get rid of the idiots who were doing that. He says, how do you apply for the grant money? I want to know what that process looks like. Who says, yay, that sounds like a good idea, studying rabbits. I want names. Oh, there's a figure from the 80s who had this show in the 80s and 90s on TV late at night who would tell you how to get all this free government money. I had forgotten about the guy until people brought him up. And so I looked him up. I just can't remember his name now, but he's on X. He's still around. He's like in his 60s or 70s now. But he always promised how easy free government money was. And he's still around. You can find him. I don't think you should apply for this stuff. It seems like a really bad time to try. Mimi Wright says, obviously, Bishop Strickland's tired of being on the outside. I have lots of illicit types here. Been here for years, peacefully living people. We aren't getting rid of them, only violent. Well, for now, Mimi, for now. They have said they're going to go after everybody who's illicitly here. Now, those numbers are probably about 30 million people. So if I was in that position, I wouldn't be that worried as long as I kept my head down and didn't cause trouble and get on anybody's radar. But you're going to see workplaces targeted, raided. It's going to happen. And it's going to happen in the next few months. President's already complaining to Tom Homan that they're not doing enough, getting enough people out. So get ready. It's not going to just be those who are here committing crime. There is a method for approving this money. That agency was told in no certain terms to okay everything. Yes. Craig says he remembers the guy I'm talking about. Right. Everybody who's a little older, as soon as you mention that, everybody has seen that ad at least one, that paid program at least once. You had a sleepless night and you turned on the TV and you saw that show. Everybody who's a little older in the United States remembers that guy. $19.50 per dozen in LA selling individual eggs for $100. Wow. So I bought eggs at Sam's Club yesterday. It was $8.64 for a 24 pack, limit 2. If you have a Sam's Club or Costco membership, this is a good time to do it. $6.50 yesterday for a dozen eggs. See, I'm used to paying that much, but that's only because there are a few food items that if you are going to pay extra for, it's a good idea to. And eggs are one of them. If you know how chickens are treated, a little extra for eggs. That's why when I can afford it, I usually buy like pasture raised, but it always costs more. Gas and food prices in America are crazy. They're actually relatively low compared to other places, but we're used to them being lower. And see, the problem is previous administration shut off or shut down the policies that made things affordable, and it had an almost immediate impact. But undoing that takes more time. So they're like the first day, the president came in and brought back the pipeline with a stroke of his pen. He unfettered a lot of the restrictions on drilling. Well, that takes time to get those operations started. It just does. On top of the fact that we are right now in the middle of winter in the United States, which means a lot of times when the weather is really bad, the oil men are not out in the fields doing what they do. The truck drivers are not delivering the fuel. The refineries might be running at limited capacity due to weather. So these things take a little time. And I almost think that's what they were counting on for the weird flurry of activity that Biden did at the end. And I'm not trying to like cope and give you a thing. I'm just giving you a policy example. Gas wasn't going to drop by 30 cents a gallon within hours of the stroke of a pen. It takes time. It takes more time to fix something than it does to destroy something, with the exception of the church, by the way. I was thinking about this. It's easy to destroy something in the material world, and including institutions. But weirdly enough, if you want an example of divine providence, there's been a concerted effort to destroy the Catholic Church from within for like a century, and here the church still stands. That by itself should tell you everything you need to know about the Catholic Church and its claims about its origins. The fact that with people like James Martin, or the priest I'm about to show you here as we get ready to wrap this up, that despite all these folks, the church is still here. Doing it the hard way. Says fuel's just under $2 a liter. I think that's about $8.80 a gallon here in Australia. Stop complaining. See what I mean? That's exactly what I mean. Okay. I am paying in my town in Oklahoma, the cheapest gas price was, I think, $2.57 at the Walmart gas station. $2.57 a gallon. I went to Costco Friday and filled up the tank, and it was like $2.37. Now that's about 40 miles from where I'm at. So, closer to the city and the interstates, if you know where refineries are and you know where the fuel routes are, you'll notice that that's where the gas prices are cheaper because they just have to travel less distance to get the gas to them. That's why it's cheaper. But think about it, $8.80 a gallon. That's actually really bad compared to even the worst in America. Go to Los Angeles where it's ridiculously high. It's still way better than $8.80 a gallon. But there's also policies in Australia and in Western Europe to make it so you want to ride public transit or drive an electric car or ride your bike or do anything other than own a motor vehicle. And that's reflected in their gas prices. Australia has oil. I don't know if they use much of it, but they have oil. Here in Virginia, they make you pay extra for electricity when the weather gets bad. Yeah, they do here in Oklahoma too. They just do. $2.89 for 100% gas in Newcastle yesterday. Right, I put E10 in my vehicle because our gas is, well, you're like 30 minutes or 45 minutes away from me, Marine, so that's why. We're paying the same price, basically. Mimi says $3.30 regular at Costco Tigard in Oregon. Wow. Offhanded comment about gaskets. Everybody talking about gas prices. For Oregon, that's not terrible. I know I'm from Portland, Oregon originally, and I remember seeing downtown Portland gas prices before I moved out here and was shocked. The first time I really had honest sticker shock about gas, though, was the first time after I moved from Oregon to Oklahoma, and then for that Christmas flew back to visit family, I was taking pictures of the gas prices. It was mind-blowing because it's mostly policy. Your electeds choose this. This is their fault. John says a lot of Irish workers are in the U.S. illegally. The U.S. issued a green card. Many got U.S. citizenship. Right. That was back in the day. I mean, the way that this has been done has been tried. If you look at the history of that issue, there weren't any rules really about it until the late 19th century, and then there weren't that many rules about it. And then they got started tightening up, and then they just banned the practice altogether in like the 1920s until 1965, and that's when they overcorrected so much and we're in the position we are now. Electric cars are stupid, says David Aguilar. Anybody who wants one, that's their thing. I don't think the technology's there yet for it to be mass market approved. And you know who agrees with me on that? Elon Musk, the guy who sells the most electric cars in the world. He agrees. He says the power infrastructure is not there for electric cars, and there still isn't enough lithium for it. Even though they just discovered a giant lithium for making the batteries, the lithium deposit in Arkansas, to the point where they're building a refinery in eastern Oklahoma for it. There's still not enough lithium to meet the world's demand for lithium. You're going to start seeing them do weird things involving space for that. Oz Steamer says, Anthony, Australia has almost no oil, but lots of natural gas. Oh, okay. Maybe there's oil off the coast or something. Or I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking of someplace else in the region, but that's interesting to know. Do you guys have liquefied natural gas or the compressed natural gas as fuel for vehicles in Australia? We had that in central Oklahoma, but not at most gas stations. In 1999, gasoline was $1.79 per gallon in San Francisco. Now, if you adjust that for inflation, you'll see if that's a better price or not. David Melissa Aguilar says the first immigration laws were targeted against Catholics. Yes, they were. And then not long after that, against like the Chinese. If you ever want to really read some bleak history on that subject, go look in the early 20th century on how that group in general was treated. Let's see. U.S. Navy has the best technology available as they're in the Generation 7 over and above civilian nuclear. Oh, yes, they do. It's also why I'm a little surprised that the president wants to build all these Navy warships, when really, if you want to bring the Navy up to speed in terms of modern warfare, build drone carriers. That's where the future is. And anti-drone systems. That's where and anti-hypersonic missile systems. But that's a whole other subject. Let's see. Seamer says, Australia has huge deposits of natural gas, Greater Sunrise Field off of the northwest Australia. Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, I've actually been to like Western Australia, so I know the area-ish. It's almost been more than a decade. The Irish were the first involuntary servitude brought to America. Fact. Yeah, they were. But that's also one of those things you don't want to hear about. Pax Christi, eggs in Ontario were $7 a dozen, and those prices of quantity down in packages. This, like I said just a moment ago, that's because the previous administration responded to an alleged sickness among the birds by slaughtering dozens or millions of them. And it's going to take until April for the birds that are being hatched now. Like, they're rushing to hatch these things and get them to maturity. It's going to take till April until they're of an age. This is why it's a good idea if you live anywhere near a rural area, start checking your farmers markets, or looking around the countryside. You'll find farmers who sell eggs. They usually, even in good times, your eggs are $1.79 for a dozen at the grocery store. They're selling theirs for $4 or $5, but they're much better eggs. Much better eggs. And now $4 or $5 a dozen sounds like a good deal. We should all have our own chicken coops if we were allowed to. Not everybody is very good about raising chickens. I've encountered people who've tried and they were just not prepared for the amount of work it was. But on the flip side, being from Portland, Oregon, they allow people in the cities to have chickens. So, although I imagine that they're not as much of those in the last couple of years due to what they've been doing, but they allowed them. And in Portland, it was not hard to get eggs for free at the best times. Anyway, that took a weird turn, but do you agree with me in general that that Bishop Strickland's going to ruffle a few feathers with that letter? I think he's going to, because it is not as cut and dry of an issue as a lot of people try to make it think. Remember, my position on this is that our government is facilitating, for economic and political purposes, the exploitation of desperately poor people, and at the same time completely ignoring the will of the people they purport to represent. It's a multifaceted evil thing they're doing, and the best way to handle this would be to just shut the whole thing down. But I don't know. Maybe you disagree. Let me know in the comments. And if you disagree with Bishop Strickland's position, let me know in the comments what you think about this, because his position, like I said, is going to ruffle a few feathers. But with that, please pray for Bishop Strickland. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.